Hello and welcome back to the StoneburnerBooks YouTube channel. Today we are going to be doing another Japanese stab binding. This one is called the hemp leaf stitch. If you missed the last video, this is the noble binding that we made, and this one I will link the tutorial for this one down in the description. If you would like to prepare your materials, you'll notice I already have some stuff prepared. I did this in a live stream. I will also link that down in the description box. So if you want to kind of get up to speed, I would recommend prepping your materials and watching the noble binding, because the noble binding, it is a great first step when you're learning these. Today's stitch is going to be a little bit more complicated, but if you've already done one of these, it's not very hard because it's the same concept of how you stitch it. So it's just a slight variation on it. So back to the hemp leaf stitch. The very first thing I want to point out is you will notice it's hard to see this stitch pattern on this beautiful washi paper. I loved this paper because it was so colorful, but it's really, really hard to see. So here is a look at the template. So this gives you a much clearer vision of what we're actually making today. So with that in mind, that is why I chose very plain paper for my covers, because I want to let that stitch really shine, and it gets so lost in the noise of the pattern here. So when you're thinking about what cover paper you want to use, make sure that you are keeping in mind that you want it to be nice and bright so that you can see your stitches. Okay, so the very first thing that we are going to do is we're going to make our template. This is just a template here that I have and I keep on hand. I love having these because it helps me, if I haven't done this stitch in a while, it helps me remember what it looks like, where I need to put my holes and all the spacing, and just a really good indicator of front and back what they need to look like. And I keep the measurements of how many, how much thread I need for it, all of that. So if you are thinking, why are we making a template? Well, we're going to use it to punch our holes in our paper and in our covers, but it's also helpful to have on hand for the future if this is something that you think you'll be doing again. Also, it's good to, if you just want to practice stitching and not make a book right away, it's nice because then you can go ahead and just practice sewing on your template. This is just an example so you can kind of see where our goal is. It's just 5 holes, and but they're set up a little bit differently. For the noble binding, I'll just go back to reference that. All of the holes are just in one straight line. Again, only 5 holes, but all in one straight line. This time we're going to do kind of a W shape, and that's going to allow us to sew a little bit differently and add those V shapes in. Okay, so let's get started. So I have a piece of cardstock here. That's what I'm going to use for my template. And just to quickly go over my materials, these are just text weight pieces of paper. They're single sheets. That is one benefit of this style of binding, is that you don't need larger sheets folded in half. You can do individual sheets. Text weight paper. And then my covers are cardstock, but it's not the heaviest of cardstock. It's still a little bit thin. My grain is grain short, going up and down, because I am going to fold these in half. I'll show you on this example. You can see that the cover paper is folded at this edge, and then it's open here at the spine edge. So we are using pages and covers that are 4.5 inches high. In this kind of binding, you want your pages and your covers to be the exact same height, because we will be wrapping the stitch around the top and the bottom as well as the spine. So you can't have your cover be bigger. Otherwise, it'll kind of mush it when you go to wrap it. So that means that our template is 4.5 inches high as well, so that once we have these holes, we can line everything up and punch our holes through. All right, so I'm going to get a smaller board here so that you can see. Let me get everything situated here and get some stuff out of the way. So let me put this other one here so I can reference it. So typically with a Japanese stab binding, you will put your line of holes 1 inch in from the edge, from the spine edge. So with this one, what we're going to do is we're going to have one line at 1 inch in and then the other line at 1/2 inch in. So I'm just going to use my little mat here to line up, and I'm going to use the grid lines on the mat to measure everything quickly. And since this is a template, I can just mark my line straight down on the 1 inch and then again on the 1/2 inch. I don't have to worry about, I'm not working with my regular materials and marking it up. So then the next thing is we're going to want to find this middle hole here. So we said this is 4.5 inches, so that's going to be 2.25 inches for our center. So again, just using the grid lines and the rulers on the mat. So I'm going to make a little tick mark right there at the middle. And then I want to, okay, let me make sure I'm getting this spaced out the right way. Hold on. Okay, so then we're going to have 2 other holes on this same line here. And we want to make sure that we're coming down about 3/4 inch or 1 inch in from the top and from the bottom. So let me see what I measured this one at previously. Yeah, so this is 3/4 inch from top and bottom. So I'll go ahead and do that as well. So let's come in 3/4 inch here and make our little mark. And then we will come in 3/4 inch from the bottom and make our little mark. And these little marks are just indicating where we're going to punch these holes. Okay, so now that we have our lines, our 3 holes on here, we're going to center our other 2 holes for the second line. And I am just trying to kind of eyeball where this is here. And let's see. Okay, I'm just going to make a little tick mark. That's just an eyeball measurement. Then I'm going to go back in and see how far in from the edge that is. That is 1.5 inches, and that sounds like a really good measurement to use. So we're going to use 1.5 inches in on this side as well. And that looks great. So looks pretty even. Now the next thing that I'm going to need is this smaller hole punch. If you can see there, that little teeny piece right here, this is only 1/16 inch, so it's much smaller than a regular one, but it's perfect for this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up with these little tick marks and punch my holes. So the reason I like using a hole punch versus an awl is that the hole punch is actually clearing out the material, the paper. And with these types of sewings, you're going through that hole with your thread multiple times. So it's not like a typical stitch where you're just going in and out of the hole maybe once, maybe twice. This one you'll see, so here we're going in 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 thicknesses of thread in this single hole here. This one we have 3 thicknesses. So you can see there's a lot of thread going in the hole. So that's why I like using the hole punch, because it really clears it all out. With an awl, sometimes it just pushes the paper through and doesn't actually clear it out. So the more that the material is kind of on the back side, it kind of like clogs up the waxwork. So it makes it easier to get your needle and thread through so many different times. Okay, so now we're going to set the old one aside. So what we want to do for this one is, before we punch the holes in our covers, we want to take our covers and fold them short edges together. And because I made sure to fold with my grain, even though this is a cover stock, it's got a nice fold there. And then just doing the other one as well. Okay, so now we can punch our covers. So there are two different ways that you can do this. You can just put your template, line it up here. Now, before I get started on the two different ways, I'm going to mention you want to keep all of your materials in the same order. So say this is our book here, our front and back covers. You'll notice I cut my covers just a little teeny bit longer so that when they're folded, there's a tiny bit of an edge there to protect that end of the pages. So if this is my front cover, I want to keep that in order. I'm going to kind of set things aside because you don't want to end up flipping things upside down. And then this is my back cover, so I want to make sure that I'm using the template and punching everything in the same way. I wouldn't want to be like punching it like this and then flipping it over, because these spaces might not be exactly on, and it makes everything easier when you're sewing if you keep everything in line. I know that's like, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but once you get into actually sewing it, you'll notice that if something is off, it makes it just so much harder. So with that said, what you can do, you can either hold your template like this and then just punch through, or you can hold your template in place and then just put a little mark in each hole where you need to punch, and then you can go back through and punch your holes. So I think that's what I'm going to do for the covers, and then for the pages I might hold it in place. Okay, so we've got that. I'm going to set that to the side because I know that that's now my back piece. And what I'm going to do is I'll take a couple pages at a time. These hole punchers can really only do a couple sheets at a time. And I'll give it a whirl to try it, getting it lined up with my template. So you can see that we've got our first set of pages punched. I'm going to set them to the side. Now I'm going to go ahead and punch the rest of the pages, but I will speed it up because I'm going to be using the exact same process. Okay, last but not least, I am doing the final cover. Alright, so now I can set my template aside and gather everything together, and let's see if you can see. There is actually light going through, so they're all lined up in the right way. I'm going to get this out of the way, and I'm going to measure my thread for this one. So I'm going to use a very bright yellow thread. Maybe wouldn't be my top choice. I mean, I like the yellow thread with this, but I would maybe use something more like that, or maybe a purple, but I want it to be nice and bright and show up on screen. So for measuring how much thread we need for this binding, what you're going to measure is 5 times the height of the book. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, and you just need a straight needle for this, which I forgot to get out. So I am using these bookbinding needles, but you could use any large eye straight needle if you're just trying this out and you don't have specialized bookbinding materials. That is totally fine, but you can use, you know, this is waxed linen thread, but you could just, if you want to practice this, you can use regular copier paper and, you know, maybe a thicker paper, or you could use regular paper for the covers too. And you could just use regular thread and a needle just to practice and get it down. All right, so one other thing you may want to have before you get started on this is I have these teeny tiny clothespins, and they are helpful for kind of being an extra set of hands to hold everything together. Usually you could also use binder clips, but sometimes binder clips will leave a little indent on the paper. So depending on how, you know, precious you want to be with your paper, you might not want a little indent left where you were clipping it together. Okay. All right, let's get started on the sewing. So if you've done the noble binding tutorial, you know that we kind of sew through the hole and then around and then down and then around and then down and around the spine, down and around and then we come back up. So that's kind of the general premise for this one as well. If you haven't done the noble binding and you have none of that just made sense, don't worry, I will explain it all. But we're looking at the front cover right now. We are going to start by putting our needle through the back of it and pulling it through. And now this is why it's kind of nice to have, whoops, that almost went through. This is why it's nice to have these clothespins, is because you can actually tuck your little end of your thread under there. If you don't have one, just hold it with your finger while you're doing this. It's not a huge deal. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start by wrapping our thread up to the top of the book and then putting that needle again through the back of the book and coming to the front. And you can just kind of generally get it in the right position and then give it a little tug to get the tension out. Remember, not, especially on this first stitch, not to pull too hard, because if you pull really hard, you can pull your thread all the way through. So we've wrapped our top stitch, and now we're going to go to the side. And we're going to wrap around the spine of the book. And again, just put the needle through the back of the book and bring it forward. Okay. And again, that little motion, that's just me making sure that the tension is on the threads. So now we're done with this little part here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do our straight stitch down, and we're going to go down to this hole that was on our closer line to the spine, and that's going to be where we're making part of that diagonal. So we're going from the front to the back, and now we're going to wrap around the spine, just on this little short piece. So that means that we're going to once again go through the front to the back, and then get it lined up and get the tension out. And now I'm going to flip it over, so we're looking at the back. You can see that there's some empty spaces here, but our next move is going to be going to the next wider hole to make the diagonal. So you'll see we're back here on this on the 1-inch line instead of the 1/2-inch line. And I'm going to pause here because if you haven't done the noble binding, if this is your first time, you'll start to see there's a missing space here, there's a missing space here if we compare it to our template. Don't worry about that. There's a lot more sewing to be done, and you kind of do it in a pattern. So I'm going to flip it over. You'll see right here we don't have this diagonal line, but we do have it on the back. So when we're going to kind of work our way down, and then we're going to work our way back, and that'll fill in all of the holes. So we have our thread coming through this middle hole. We're going to wrap it around the spine and bring it from the back to the front, the needle through. Whoops. Now that was splitting my thread. So if it does split your thread, I'd recommend just pulling your needle out and then pulling a little bit of tension on your thread so that it makes room for your needle to go through without splitting that thread. Okay, see, this is what happens is it's not going to just line up perfectly right when you sew it through. So that's why I always say just get it to like approximately where it needs to be, and then move it into place, and then take the last little bit of tension out. Okay, so now we're going to move down to that next hole on the 1/2-inch line. Again, it's the same thing. We're coming from the front to the back on here. And then we're going to wrap around the short part of the spine here and go front to back again. Oops. This is the one downside of having the clips on, is sometimes the loops get stuck on them. And once you get a little bit of it sewn, like basically once you get stuff sewn all the way through all the holes, you can take them off. But I do find it helpful to have them on there. Okay, so now we are on the back, and we are making a straight stitch to that final hole on the 1-inch line from back to front. So you'll see it's a similar shape on the back, but it's in the spaces where they are empty here. So what we want to do is, again, wrap to the spine here. And then we're going to wrap to the bottom. Okay. All right, and then we're going to go from here. We're going to do our straight stitch. Okay, so we're starting to make that there. Now we're going to do our straight stitch here. We don't need to do any more wrapping. It's all straight stitches from here. So now we're just finishing this up. See, this is, did you see how hard that was for me to get through? So that's what I'm saying, is that's why it's so nice to use a hole punch, because even with that, you might still have, it might be a little bit hard at this point to get the needle through. So there and look, I split my thread. That's exactly why it was so hard. At this point, it's not a huge deal that I split my thread, because basically all the tensions are set. But if you split your thread when you're making one of these wrapping loops, it kind of like, it sets your thread in that one spot. And if you need to pull tension out of it, it kind of can get messed up there. So you have two options at this point. If you like this design with it being open like this, you can stop here and you can tie this little end here through to this one. But if you want to have the finished closed stitches here, then stick with me for this next little bit. This is something that it's kind of like whatever you like. If you want something, maybe your pattern on your cover or your design on your cover lends itself more to having it be a little bit open. here, or you just like that style more, then just stop here, tie your knot, and you're done. If you want to do it kind of the full traditional way, then keep watching. But again, at this point, it's structurally, it's fine. As long as you tie that knot and close it, you are good to go. This will be totally fine structurally. So it's just an aesthetic choice at this point. Now, so if you decide you want to do it kind of the way that I've shown on my template, then we're going to finish this straight stitch here. Okay, so that's what the back would look like. And now all we're going to do is we're going to go down and come back up with our straight stitches. So we're going to go front to back through the middle here. And this is where it can get a little bit tricky because we're going through, you know, for a fourth time now. So just a straight stitch there. And then on the back, we're going to go from the back to the front. Okay, and then we're going to go bring it back up through the middle hole again. Okay, and then we're going to close it here. And I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background. I can hear there are kids outside and we have the windows open. It's so nice here. So I do apologize if you hear any dog barking noise. So what I did here was I put my needle underneath this stitch right here, because when I tie my knot, I want to anchor it with a stitch. That way it's not going to be sliding out anywhere. And I'm going to trim this down just a little bit so it's not so much excess. So the knot that I typically do is a square knot, so right over left, and just trying to pull that tension, and then left over right, and then that's finished. Now, if you can do these types of bindings with a hardcover, and in that case, you usually have a larger hole, and the goal is to stick that knot down into that hole to kind of hide the knot and just really finish it off. Because this is just a thin paper cover, I can't do that. So what I like to do is, using the waxiness of the waxed linen thread, I will cut my tail ends off, and then just like this one, I just kind of like try to smush it together, use that wax to stick that end to that thread. And then let's see, this one probably wants to go down flat here. So that helps it just kind of blend in a little bit. But there we go. We have a finished hemp leaf stitch book, and it is very easy to see this versus this one. So now just seeing them side by side, this is one last look at why the cover paper really truly makes a difference on here. So I hope that this has been informative for you. If you try out this binding, please let me know down in the comments if you have any questions about it. Also let me know that. But I hope you enjoyed this, and if you liked this one and haven't done the Noble binding, definitely go back and check that one out as well. So I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.